Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Stories That Inspire Us podcast. My name is Janice, your hostess for this amazing podcast. You know, as you all know too, I am a live podcaster, so I'm also podcasting, simulcasting through the Wisdom Audio app, and I want to thank all of my listeners who have hopped on. Thank you so much for being here. Before I introduce today's guest, I have a question for everyone. Many of us suffer from different types of ailments, and everyone is very unique and individualized, of course. And when you suffer from migraines and all the things that accompany that, but not only that, but what physiologically, psychology, and so much stuff goes into why they develop. Well, would you like to live pain-free? And do you suffer from migraines? I know that many of us do. So I am so excited to welcome to the Stories podcast, the amazing Teresa Lodato. Welcome to the Stories That Inspire Us.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I am excited to have you. And, Teresa, as I'm just making sure everything is running properly here with all the different little things that happen in our tech world. I know that, for instance, you were a former very stressed out financial services advisor.
Mm-hmm.
And, with the news cycle, and we just learned like within the last couple of days about, for instance, crypto and what's going on with FTX. But I can't even imagine being in that business, the amount of stress for you and your clients. And now you're working with teens and adults specifically to mitigate some of those factors. So can you start us out with where your journey began, obviously as a financial services advisor, but you're also an author. So I want to kind of touch upon that first to kind of give everybody the backdrop of your story.
Sure. It's interesting. I was in financial services. I worked in, my undergrad degree was minored in accounting and finance. And immediately I interned for Merrill Lynch when I was in college, and then was hired immediately out and began my career as a financial advisor. And I had worked in banking, during college and prior. I was a credit manager. I went to college a little bit later in life because I served in the United States Navy. And, through my career, I, did my thing. I took a break to have my son, was in a really difficult marriage, made the decision to go back to work. And when I went back to work, I started working in a private banking and investment group at Merrill Lynch. And that is really when the stress hit me. I mean, I had gone through, some of the downturns in the market as, they go up and down. But it was when I was working in private banking and investments, and I was working really long hours. I had about an hour commute by train to get into the city. And so I would wake up at 3:45 in the morning, and I would go to the gym, I would work out, I'd get on the train so I could arrive in the city before 6 o'clock, before market hours. And I was working with financial advisors that met the needs of extremely high net worth individuals. We're talking the CEOs and of large corporations, et cetera. And so navigating those relationships, not only with the financial advisors, because I was in more of a consultant role at that point in time, but really trying to meet the needs of the clients and their extremely high demands. So I have this really highly demanding job. I'm working these really long hours. I'm having to leave work early, like about 4 o'clock, so that I could take the hour train ride home so I could pick my young son up from daycare and then go home, make dinner, spend some time with him. My ex-husband expected kind of more of a traditional life, even though I was obviously a career woman. And so there was a lot of conflict there about my guilt, and my guilt about my son, and my guilt about not living up to my responsibilities. And I would wrap everything up, try to be in bed by 9, usually wouldn't make it till 10. And here I was waking up at 3:45. So I was doing that wash and repeat Monday through Friday. And then usually because of that, and if anybody has migraines, it's not usually during the stress that we get the migraines. It's when the stress stops or when there's a break in the stress. And so come the weekends, I would be sick in bed with a migraine. And so I'd spend all weekend practically in bed. So what really didn't occur to me at the time was, number one, I knew I was under stress, but I didn't realize how much the stress and all the impacts was affecting me across my life. I didn't understand the biological reasons for the stress. And I didn't know what to do. I was doing all the self-care things, oh, I take a hot bath, or I go for a walk at lunchtime, I watched what I ate. But that's great. Obviously, it's important. However, when you are so stressed out, those things don't even touch like they're just touching the surface of what is really going on. And so that is where my story began.
Wow. I have so many questions, but I think the first thing that pops to my mind is when you said you did not understand, like you're going bat out of hell through the week, like no time for yourself, basically. So you're on that, I don't want to say adrenaline, and I'm sure I'm not using the proper word, but you're on that adrenaline kind of rush. And then you hit the wall on the weekend when you got home, when you had time to yourself, yet you found yourself in bed because you were so sick with these migraines. So the migraine, now for the layperson, I've had a few doozies of headaches, probably nowhere near people that suffer from migraines. And they not only just flat out, you can't do anything, but it affects so much more. It affects, your circulatory system, your digestive system. So many things go into that. So at what point did you say, all right, I've had enough. I have to figure out something that works for me, which is really, I think, a great question to ask. But you, I think for a lot of people, you get to that point where you're like, okay, I've had enough. But then it's like, okay, great. Now what do I do?
Yeah. Well, unfortunately for me, I think I don't know if it's my type A personality that I was so proud of for so long, or what it was at the time, but it wasn't until I developed a rare and serious form of migraine where I began getting stroke-like symptoms with attacks. That is what it ended. It ended my career. It was the beginning of the end of my marriage. It was just the end of so much. However, I look back now and I see what a gift it was. And I think a lot of people, we hear this about people who maybe lost a loved one, or who maybe almost died, or maybe had a near death experience or something like that. Those people come back and say, well, now I know. And now, it's that life changing in a moment, transformation that happens. And even though it wasn't a bam, it's changed, it wasn't that. It took a good year for me to kind of go through and set myself up along the healing process. But it was the pivotal moment for me of not only recognizing how my career was, or how I was in my career was causing me so much stress, but also recognizing the toxic marriage that I was in and how much stress that was putting on me as well. And so, there's all these different elements that go into our stress response. And now that, I studied psychology in grad school, and I've studied neuroscience, and have additional advanced certifications in relational trauma, neuroscience, and all these different things, just to help me understand what I myself went through. And so now I'm able to share this knowledge with others. And what I took away from this is that I stopped trusting myself. I stopped trusting my body. My body was telling me so many things that I just ignored. I pushed past, the The early signs of migraine, I wasn't trusting myself, so I wasn't listening to my body. And it wasn't until, many years later during my healing journey, probably about, actually, I guess it was just like 2 years, 2 or 3 years after I was initially diagnosed, that I started recognizing the early signs of migraine for me. And one of the early signs was something that my ex husband used to give me all kinds of attitude, and he wasn't very kind, but I would start yawning. And when I was around him, he'd say, "Gosh, am I boring you? Why don't you go take a nap? You just need to get more sleep." It was just kind of in this really nasty, unagreeable tone, as if he was so offended that I was yawning in his presence. And what I realized is that yawning is an early indicator for me and clients that I work with. And, I've shared this with my doctor, and my doctor says, "Oh, yeah, lots of other patients have this as well," is an early indicator of a migraine coming. Now, irregardless of what you do naturally or holistically in order to manage migraines, one of the most important things is that the earlier you recognize that you're being triggered and that a migraine is coming, you're able to take abortive medication, which makes it far more effective. So, no matter, like I said, if you rely on medication or whether you have some things you can do to help you without using medication, recognizing those early symptoms is such an important indicator. And it all boils down to learning to trust yourself. And so that was my biggest takeaway.
Wow. And now what you said earlier, and I just want to repeat this back, makes so much sense to me. I see what a gift it is now, which led you to this different path. So in that respect, obviously with my son, I can totally relate to that. It led me down, I was going one path, this is what I was going to do. I do have two other podcasts, but when you're in that moment where your life is going, okay, I'm a virtual legal assistant and I still do some stuff here and there, but I realized that was not where my heart was. My heart was more on
Mhm.
the creative side. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I just want to say, it is completely okay to change the trajectory. Ooh, try saying that 3 times fast. Because, you know, as you mentioned too, the early signs, you started to recognize them, but also, okay, with the yawning, you're now in tune to that. Okay, maybe I should take some of my medicine now because I know it's oncoming and it hopefully will not be as bad.
Yeah. Well, and the additional thing that is so surprising to me is that in this learning to trust myself, in this process of learning to trust myself, getting into deeper relationship with my body, because every body is different. Everybody is different. As a side note, I had to have surgery on my cervical spine, and I had been experiencing numbness and tingling down into my hand, all the way down my arm. And the disc where I had the herniated disc, typically in most bodies, affects like your pointer finger and your middle finger. But for me, it affected my little finger and my ring finger. And so many of the doctors were like, "Oh, that's curious, because normally it's this." And it reinforced for me that every body is different. And so paying attention to your own body is key. But what the true gift, I mean, yes, it was a gift in understanding the migraine and being able to mitigate migraines so that now I can have a career again that I love and I'm doing it healthier. But in addition to that, being able to trust myself, being able to lean into what my body is sharing with me, the information my body is sharing with me at all times, has helped me make wiser financial decisions, has helped me to find healthier relationships, has helped me to make wiser choices in my life. That I feel like is the gold that something like this, a transformation like this, can bring about in your life. And when you recognize that goal and you realize that gold and you recognize how to mine it, how to really get in there and capture all of that gold and then integrate it into your life, that's what makes your life filled with so much bliss and joy and pain free and just loving everything that you have that's going on in the world. So it completely transformed my life at such a deep level.
Wow. And I just want to say, as you were describing that, like I felt your energy, I saw your energy, and there was such joy in what you were saying.
Yeah, I
Wow.
can't imagine looking back now. I never would have imagined the life that I lead right now. You know, the man I'm married to and how incredibly supportive that he is. And if I didn't trust myself at the beginning of our relationship, I never would have been with him. I mean, there was a situation around him that most women would have been like, I don't know about. And however, I trusted myself. I trusted, you know what, this is the guy for me. That situation was gone in an instant. And then I had this beautiful relationship with this man. And so, you know, like I said, the financial decisions we've made together, oh my gosh, if I didn't trust myself, I would have made some poor financial decisions, or I would have, you know, because when you're stressed out, you can't access your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive functioning. So you can't make wise choices. So it's no wonder so many of us make these choices in life, whether it's with a relationship or with our finances or whether it's with our career. When we do it from a stressed out place, it's not going to work out to our best, you know, to our highest and best self. We're not, like you had mentioned, making a heart-centered choice or having your heart guide you. That really is the essence. It's kind of a politically correct term, but it really is the essence of what allows you to find happiness, to find joy. I mean, we're all going to have ups and downs in life. That's just part of life. But learning how to navigate those so that they're not these super high mountains and these really low valleys, but really being able to mitigate it more so it's more like rolling hills allows us to move effortlessly in and out of different situations, gathering the learning, applying our wisdom, applying that trust, and then really living lives that are filled with joy.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That is so true. So I want to ask you, where in the spectrum did you decide to write your book?
You know, it was funny. I knew that I had a book in me, and I know I have a lot of books in me. In fact, I'm working on book 2 and 3 as well. One is a children's book that my husband says, just knock that one out. And I'm like, well, it's not that simple. But I always knew I had a book after coming through this experience. I started talking with other people. And then, of course, in grad school, you know, working in psychology, you know, working with people there. And then when I was out of grad school and got my coach certification, that's when I think it really all came together of what a what a, and how so many people aren't in touch with this, who don't understand. The coach training that I did, there were a lot of leaders from Google and Apple, and you know, because here it is in the Silicon Valley area, and so I had a view into the lives of themselves as well as their teams. And I recognized, wow, this is really something that affects people across the board. This is something that people need to know about. And so when I sat down to write my book, you know, I took it from a little bit of a story perspective. And so I took not only my own experience, but the experience of clients that I had worked with and people that I had known. And I created a character that kind of embodied all of that. And I took her through the book, through her coaching journey, and did little takeaways from that. And I feel like that was just like the tip of the iceberg as far as getting people to get in relationship with their bodies. My second book that's coming out will be really diving in deeper into the stress response and how you can improve your relationships, make wiser decisions in life by understanding it and then leveraging it, being able to get your body to that calm, neutral place so that you can not be impacted by your body's natural stress response. And you're absolutely right, it is an adrenaline rush. It's also a bunch of other hormones. It's a complex system that occurs. But when you are being carried away by that adrenaline, by that norepinephrine, by all of those hormones, you can't see clearly. I mean, it's virtually impossible to see things with clarity. And when you are making decisions in life, when you are wanting to be your best self, when you're wanting to be the best at whatever you do to be successful, whatever your goal is, it's so critical to have that clarity and to have that trust. And so that's really what my second book will be diving into.
Wow. And the clarity and trust aspect can really, obviously with our relationships in our jobs, can really apply to anything or a different matter that we all have so many different stresses, of course, within the last couple of years with the pandemic and everything going on in our world today. And lately I've heard just from different VAs or podcast hosts that everybody is just so stressed out. What would you say are some things that maybe somebody, for instance, listening today on the Wisdom Audio app, and by the way, thank you to all my amazing listeners that are currently on, are a couple tips that maybe you can give someone who's like at that, I want to say breaking point, but at that breaking point when they're like, oh my God, I can't take any more of this crap.
Yeah. Well, first, recognize that it is a point where you can make a decision. You have a choice. I feel like so many people that are so stressed out feel as though they have to do everything, like everything is on their shoulders. And I think that that contributes to the mental health crisis that we're also experiencing, especially in the United States, but around the world, is that understanding that you're not alone. That's the first thing. This is something that so many of us experience, and some people are just better at hiding it, keeping it under wraps. The next thing is recognizing how stress affects you personally. Because, a lot of times when people think about stressed out, burnt out, they're thinking of people who are getting an abundance of norepinephrine and adrenaline. So like when they get stressed, there are certain people that get too much. There's a I'm blanking on her name, but she's a neuroscientist, and she describes the Goldilocks of the brain. And I apologize, I'll have to get you her name after the to put in the show notes. But she describes Goldilocks of the brain. So Goldilocks story is too little, too much, just right. Okay, basically. And so same thing happens in the brain. When you experience stress, you can either go to the too much side or you can go to the too little side. And depending on where your body naturally goes when you're stressed, will determine how you need to get yourself back into that just right place from a chemical perspective in your brain. And I think that's a really important thing for people to learn, because so many of us are taught that, oh, what you need to do is take a hot bath, go for a walk, do yoga, practice meditation. That is for a great number of people who fall into the too much, whose brains get flooded with too much dopamine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, etc. However, there are also people who get stressed out because they have too little stimulation of their brain. And so recognizing that in your stress response, which is the fight, flight, or freeze, recognizing where you fall. Now, this hasn't been, or at least I haven't found a scientific study to support this, but what I have noticed in myself and what I've noticed in my clients is the people that end up in the too much. So if you're getting too much of all the hormones in your brain, Typically, you will experience the fight response or the flight response. So that's typically what you want to do when you get stressed out. You either get angry and frustrated, or you just feel like, oh my God, everything's falling apart. I just want to run away. Oh my God, oh my God, oh God. Okay, so if you're experiencing that, chances are you're getting too much. That's when it's time to take a step back, give yourself a break, put intentional breaks throughout your day, make sure that you're breathing. That is a huge thing, taking deep breaths. I recommend to clients to drink a lot of water. Every time you get up to go to the bathroom, take just 2 minutes to drop down, do some deep breathing exercises. That is really effective for people that have too much. However, if you are someone who falls into more of that paralysis in your stress response, you can't do anything. You're like a deer in the headlights. You're just kind of frozen. You find yourself binging on Netflix. You find yourself not able to get out of bed. You find yourself not able to engage in work, and you feel really tired a lot. Typically, those are people who have not enough of those hormones that help stimulate the brain. And so for those people, it's really important not to take a break, but actually to step into action. Do small things and slowly build on those things. If you've got a task that you need to do, break it down into bite-sized pieces. Now, granted, that last example actually works equally as well for the too much, because if you break down tasks, you're able to institute those breaks. However, people that don't have enough of those chemicals going to stimulate the brain and getting it back into balance really do need things like understanding what they're doing things for. So understanding your values. Why are you choosing to go to that job or be in that relationship or do whatever, reach that goal? You also want to look for things that are going to stimulate your brain. So instead of calming your brain down, you're going to want things that stimulate it. So maybe it is doing things like kickboxing, for example. Someone who falls on the too much stress, kickboxing is like one of the worst things you could do as far as exercise, because it's stimulating your stress response system. That's why it's recommended you do things like yoga, yin yoga, meditation if you're on the too much side. Step class, that was popular many moons ago, but that is something also. Too little, if you're on the too little side, yeah, step class, kickboxing, um, oh gosh, CrossFit, all of those things are great for people who have too little. If people who are over on the too much stress are doing things like kickboxing, CrossFit, chances are they'll still struggle with that stress response, because all of those exercises engage your hormones. They engage the norepinephrine and the adrenaline. And what you want to do when you're on the too much side is you want to calm down. That's the walks in nature, that's swimming, that's yin yoga, etc. So that's a really, really long tip too, but hopefully people can kind of understand it. The third thing is really recognizing that when you're triggered, so when you experience a strong emotion of any kind, that is a triggering. It's basically a little marker along a neural pathway in your brain that has stated, you know what, in past experiences, this was a similar experience, and this is how I responded. Your brain is basically saying it to itself. This is how I responded in that situation, and it got me out of it. It kept me safe, because that's what the brain wants to do. It wants to keep you safe. So what the brain also does is it predicts what's going to happen based on past experiences. So we're not really reacting to a situation, a stressful situation or a strong emotion. Our brain is actually predicting what's going to happen, like I said, based on past experiences, situations, people. So having that knowledge, when you get triggered, whether it's being triggered by a person or something in your career, or maybe the news, whatever, if you experience a strong emotion, first thing to do is just bring awareness to it. Oh my gosh, I'm triggered. I'm being triggered right now. And this is for some people, they can do it like that. Some people, it takes a lot of time for them to bring their awareness. Some people might not realize and bring awareness to it until they have yelled or screamed or thrown something, release that anger, that they might realize, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't have done that. It really wasn't, maybe I need to reevaluate that. So any way that you can to bring that awareness closer and closer and closer to that point will help with the stress response, because what you're experiencing that moment is a stress response. And so the more you can get ahead of that stress response and recognize it, the better able you will be to navigate those situations. And the end goal is to become neutral, to neutralize this. Now, this is what happens a lot in therapy and in coaching and any other sort of work that kind of deals with the same things. Is the whole point is to release the charge of emotion from an experience. If you're working with post-traumatic stress disorders, veterans that come back from wars, working with that is helping them to neutralize the situation so that they do not experience the emotions, the memories, everything else that's really tied up in that neural point in the brain. So, that's kind of an extreme, but even for people in everyday life, the more awareness you can bring, the more you can get to a point of neutrality about past situations and people, the better you're going to be at being able to make a wiser choice in that moment, because you're going to be neutralizing those emotions. You're going to be neutralizing the stress response. You're going to be providing your brain additional information, additional data, so that it can make better predictions in the future. Because the more you neutralize it, then your brain stores that information. And the brain doesn't like being in a constant state of stress. So when you give it one or two times of the brain being neutralized and realizing, wow, that didn't really impact me. Wow, what that person says now doesn't trigger me. Then your brain's a lot happier. It's going to remember that. So the next time it happens, it doesn't go to that stress response. It goes to that neutral place. And I think that third one is actually a big key of my second book that I'm writing, because it is so critical for people to understand that power of neutrality.
Wow. I'm getting the chills, and I'm going to share something very personal. My listeners and viewers know that my son suffered a life-threatening injury. Long story short, with that, you were talking about triggers, and what I noticed after my son was hospitalized October 21st, so I had to rush down to Philly. What I noticed about triggers is on my ride home from that trip, with I'm watching the GPS, and there was all these triggers, whether it was the traffic, whether it was emails coming through, people call, whatever it was. I remember thinking to myself, I am being triggered by all these alerts, whatever we want to call them, notifications. So when I got home and I'm unpacking, I'm getting more of these triggers. And I just stopped, and I got really mad, not mad at anyone, just I got mad, and I'm like, wait a minute. Okay, I'm onto something here. I just realized on this drive home in this moment that I am being triggered by notifications. Why is that? I asked myself, why is that? And then it occurred to me, the time frame of when my son had his accident to the time that I found out was 13 hours. He was injured at 1 p.m. on a Monday. I didn't find out until 2 a.m. So I am constantly looking at my phone. Oh my God, did something happen with Ryan? Did something happen? And those alerts were bringing me right back to that 2 a.m. text message that said Ryan had a stroke and it's an emergency surgery. And I said, okay. And I got excited. I know that sounds weird, but I got excited in a good way, because I knew I was on to something. And then I said, well, wait a minute, I have control of this. I really do. And this may sound simple, but for me, it was a big deal. I went through my phone and when I tell you, excuse me, I turned off all my alerts. So I don't have the notification thing going all the time. I'm able to leave my phone on at night because he has
Mhm.
been hospitalized 12 times within the last 15 months. But I check my messages, every couple hours. And I have to tell you that, and I think I may have shared this with you before, that I haven't slept that good since that notification. Instead of waking up 6 to 8 times a night, it's now, when I originally started that, and this was just within the last 2 weeks, I maybe woke up 3 to 4 times a night, and now I'm down to 2 to 3 times a night. So roundabout way, I am starting to get better sleep. I feel more like myself. Um, I still have to have that coffee in the morning. That's okay. And so thank you for sharing that, because that is so important, as you said, to recognize those triggers. And I thought it was real important for me to share that. So thank you for sharing those amazing tips.
Thank
Wow.
you for sharing your experience with it, because it's so hard to explain, unless you go into the story a little bit, to explain to someone how it can happen. And what I would like to offer to you and to the listeners is that if you're in a place where you are right now, where you are finally starting to feel like yourself, there is more that you can get out of this. And the place where I would like to present to you where you can go is being able to, before you go to bed, checking in with yourself. Is there something that's going to come up during the night that I need to be aware of? Is there an important message that's going to come through? And being able to listen to yourself and trust yourself with either a yes or a no. Because if it's a no, then you can sleep through the night. You don't have to worry about notifications, because if you trust yourself and your body is going to give you those indicators, then you can get a restful night's sleep without waking up whatsoever. And if you get a yes, then you can ask more questions. I love that you asked questions when you recognized I'm being triggered. Why is that? Oh, what a great question. It's something that I tell people so often. Ask your body these questions. Your body is a barometer. We are constantly picking up information from everything around us. The HeartMath Institute has been doing incredible studies as far as your electromagnetic field. And I know this is kind of tripsing into more of the woo part of science, but it's actually not so woo. It's actually being scientifically proven. The reason we don't have a lot of these studies is because people didn't think in the past that it could, well, we didn't have the technology for one, but number two, people didn't think that you could study this. So places like the HeartMath Institute and the work they're doing around stress and resilience. There was also a study that came out, let's see, I think it was the end of last year. I might have the date wrong, but it was a joint study between Yale University and Columbia University. And Dr. Lisa Miller was kind of the head of that study. And what she recognized is that people who have a spiritual connection with themselves, and whether that's they're religious, or even if you're non-religious, if you have a steep spiritual connection, you realize that there's more to you than just your meat suit. You have a 75%, I think is what it is, more likely chance of rebounding successfully from a traumatic experience without experiencing depression or any of those other, anxiety, depression, etc. And if you have a 92% of being essentially protected from that, if you're at high risk for depression or anxiety, there is a 62% reduced risk of relative suicide if you have a strong spiritual connection. So, this really is the focus for me, looking at combining science and spirituality to be able to help adults and teens learn to trust themselves. And like I said, there's so many studies, more and more studies that are coming out that are starting to delve into these areas because it isn't a woo thing. It really is. Even, intuition in of itself. Neuroscientists have determined, at least up to this point, what they've learned is that intuition isn't some woo mystical thing. It's actually the way your brain works. It interprets information. There was actually another study. I don't have the name right off the top of my head, but it was a team of psychologists, and what they did is they took a group of people in their study and they had them go through two decks. One was a high risk, high reward scenario deck, and the other deck was low risk, no reward, or low reward scenario deck. They found on average, people in this study took 80 times, 80 draws before they determined which deck was high risk, high reward, or which one was low risk, low reward. However, they had their bodies all, connected to technology, to machines. And after 10 draws, only 10 draws, their bodies started emitting a galvanic skin response. They started sweating. Their bodies knew, and it was only when they were drawing from the high risk, high reward deck that they would have this skin response. They would start sweating. That's a delta of 10 to 80. I mean, that's a significant delta. Their bodies knew which one was going to be high risk, high reward, and which one wasn't, long before their conscious brain made that connection. This is such a huge area that I wish, and I mean, this is why I talk about this so much, because I get so excited about it. It's because most people would call that intuition. That's intuition. If you knew at the 10th time rather than the 80th time that something was going to happen, that's intuition. That's all that is. And intuition is actually when you asked your body that question, I'm triggered. Why is that? That's a question for your default mode network in your brain. Your brain has the default mode network, the past positive network. I won't get into the whole thing, but the default mode network is where we go to access the information that our body has taken in that the brain doesn't know what to do with. It doesn't have something similar. The brain likes to link things that are similar. So it's like this, or anything that's new in the brain, it doesn't quite know what to do with it because it's a predictor, right? So all that kind of information the brain doesn't know what to do with, that's where you can go out and ask those questions. Why am I feeling this way? Why are they acting this way? What information can you give me about this situation? When you start asking questions that way, you start getting really clear answers. And then those answers inform you at that 10th try versus the 80th try on how to make a choice. And so you're able to course correct more quickly. When I work with leaders in corporations and I'm teaching them these techniques, they're blown away because they start seeing the patterns. They start recognizing things at the 10th try versus the 80th try. And so I think that is so important. And it's the reason that we want to get more neutral and the power of neutrality, because the more neutral you are in regards to stress response, in regards to emotion, the more clear you're going to be, the more you're going to have access to all that information in your default mode network that's going to provide you the insight that you need so that you can make the best choices in your life. And that is what it's all about. That's the heart guided choices that people speak to. It's not really the heart, but it's that combination. Although I have to say, HeartMath also came up with a study that showed that the heart has almost more neurons, the heart and the gut has almost more neurons than the brain does. And so we've given so much power and access to the brain being the almighty, when in reality, it's just functioning. It's basically an input-output organ, essentially. The heart is really taking in a lot of information. Your digestive system is taking in so much information. That's why that spinal nerve, the vagus nerve, runs down your body because it needs that information from the heart as well as the intestines. So if your audience takes away anything from this, take away that number one, you have control, you have choices, you are empowered. You don't have to do anything, you already are. Number two, learn how stress impacts you. Learn whether you are on the too much or the too little of the stimulation in your brain response. And number three, recognize that the more neutral you can become, whether it's in situations, emotions, your stress response, whatever you can do to get to that more calm, centered, neutral state, the better you're going to be able to hear the wisdom of your body, which will help you to make more informed choices overall.
Wow. So I was scribbling a lot of notes. I just want to share this with you. What I took away from that so much. But to me, the woo is the glue backed with scientific data.
I like that.
You heard it here. The woo is the glue. Oh my gosh, Teresa, this has been such an amazing podcast. Where can our viewers and listeners get connect with you further?
Absolutely. So I am just launching a YouTube channel where I'll be talking a little bit more, giving kind of little bites of information, digestible bites, I like to think of it as. So look for that. It's at Becoming Aware. And I also have my website, teresalodato.com. Um, where else? I'm not much on social media, just like with you and notifications. Social media for me is extremely overwhelming, trying to manage that when I'm working with clients and making sure that I take breaks. I am on Facebook, however, it's not the best way to connect with me. The best way is through my website. There's instructions on how to download the OWL app. The OWL app is a place where professionals like me can meet with people in more of a, hey, I've got a question, I'm seeking advice, or I just need a quick bit of information. Download the OWL app and you can follow me there. Whenever I'm online, you can connect with me and have a short 10 or 15 or 20-minute conversation. You know, if there's just something that comes up that you're like, man, I could really need someone, a little support, a little advice or guidance, that's probably the best way to reach me.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all that information. And of course, I will make sure that gets in the show notes. Uh, excuse me. This has been way beyond amazing, so informative, and you really shared such valuable information where, as a layperson such as myself, could really understand it on so many different levels. So thank you so much. And I hope you will definitely consider coming back to the podcast again.
I would love to. Thanks so much, Janice, for having me.
You're so welcome. Well, Wisdom, I'm going to do the sign off here, and then, of course, we'll do the sign off on Facebook. I want to thank all my amazing listeners. You are what makes all of this possible. And I want to encourage you, if you have a story to share, it is that important. Don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much, Wisdom, and we'll see you again real soon. Oh my gosh, such amazing information. I cannot wait to get this podcast uploaded. I want to thank everyone, especially my guest, Teresa. And her book is called Why Aren't You Listening to Me? And she's working, of course, on her other books as well. Teresa Lodato, she will be back. And thank you all so much. And we'll see you again real soon. Bye for now.
Bye.